Late in the afternoon, the city felt quieter than usual. The sun had started to sink, turning the tall buildings gold as people rushed home from work. Officer Daniels drove slowly through the streets, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other tapping lightly on the radio. For him, this shift felt like any other, nothing unusual. He liked his routine. It made him feel in control. He told himself he was strict because he cared about the job, but deep down, he enjoyed the authority that came with the uniform. Some of his coworkers avoided patrolling with him, saying he took small issues too seriously. But Daniels never saw it that way. He believed rules existed for a reason, and if people didn't follow them, they needed to learn. As he turned onto a narrow road lined with cafes and small shops, he noticed a silver car speed up slightly before slowing again. It wasn't speeding enough to be dangerous, but it was just fast enough to catch his attention. His eyes narrowed. "That's not how people should drive in a busy area," he muttered to himself. Without hesitation, he switched on his lights and signaled for the driver to pull over. The car stopped near a sidewalk, where a couple of people were chatting outside a bakery. Daniels parked behind it and stepped out, adjusting his belt and straightening his uniform. He liked looking sharp. It helped him feel more confident. As he walked toward the car, he noticed the driver was a young woman, sitting calmly with her hands resting on the steering wheel. She didn't seem scared or worried. Instead, she looked like someone who had nothing to hide. That calmness bothered him a little. He expected people to appear nervous when pulled over, but she wasn't. He tapped lightly on the window, and she rolled it down. "Good evening," she said politely. Her voice was soft but steady. "License and registration," Daniel said, not returning her greeting. He kept his tone sharp, wanting to establish control immediately. She reached for her bag slowly, moving in a way that showed she didn't want to cause any misunderstanding. Daniels watched her closely, more than necessary, but he couldn't help it. He always assumed people were hiding something. When she handed him the documents, he looked them over but didn't step away. "Do you know why I stopped you?" he asked. "I might have been going a little fast for a moment," she said. "I apologize for that." Her honesty surprised him. Most people argued or made excuses, but she didn't. Still, he didn't ease up. "Where are you headed in such a hurry?" he asked, even though the question wasn't relevant to the minor traffic situation. She gave a small, polite smile. "Just heading home." Daniels expected more, maybe nervousness, maybe hesitation, but she remained calm. That unshakable calm made him feel like she wasn't taking him seriously. "That doesn't explain why you were speeding," he said, letting annoyance creep into his voice. "I understand," she replied. "It won't happen again." Her answer was simple, respectful, and clear. But to Daniels, it didn't feel like enough. He felt she was being too relaxed, as if she didn't recognize the authority he believed he carried. He liked when people were unsettled around him. It made him feel stronger. He took a step closer, making the moment more intense than it needed to be. "Are you aware this is a busy area? People walk here. Kids run across the street. You need to be careful." "Yes, officer." "I understand," she said again, not raising her voice, not showing irritation. Pedestrians began slowing down as they passed, glancing toward the stopped car. The flashing lights always drew attention. Daniels noticed them watching, and it fed his ego a little. He liked being seen doing his job, but he didn't notice something else: how unnecessary tension was building in the scene. The young woman didn't seem intimidated, but the people watching sensed the energy shift. They could tell the officer was pushing a simple situation into something more. Daniels held onto her license longer than needed, flipping it between his fingers as if searching for an excuse to prolong the stop. "You live near here?" he asked. "Yes." "Then you definitely know this is a slow zone." "I do," she replied. "I'm really sorry for the mistake." Her politeness wasn't helping the situation. For some reason, the more calmly she spoke, the more he felt challenged. He was used to having the upper hand. Something about her confidence, quiet but clear, made him uneasy. He looked at the documents again, then back at her. "What do you do for work?" he asked. She paused for a second, surprised by the question. It wasn't related to the stop. and she knew he wasn't supposed to ask without reason. Still, she answered gently, "I'm involved in community work." "What kind of community work?" He pressed. "Local programs," she said vaguely. Daniels didn't like vague answers. He thought she was hiding something. He leaned down a bit, peering into the car as if he might spot something suspicious. "Step out of the vehicle," he suddenly said. The woman blinked, taken by surprise. "Is there a reason, officer?" "I said step out of the vehicle," he repeated, his voice firmer. The people watching from the sidewalk exchanged glances. Some of them seemed confused. It had been a simple traffic stop. Why was it turning into something bigger? The young woman looked at him carefully, as if trying to decide how far he intended to go. She didn't look scared, just thoughtful. After a moment, she slowly opened the door and stepped out. She stood straight, meeting his eyes without fear, which only irritated him more. He expected her to show signs of nervousness or guilt, but she didn't. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he paced around her car, pretending to inspect it for issues. In truth, he had already made up his mind. She was too calm, too confident, and he needed to reassert his dominance somehow. He couldn't explain why her presence bothered him, it simply did. When he walked back toward her, he noticed more people watching now. A small crowd had formed, though no one said anything. They just observed silently, sensing that something felt off. Daniels felt the pressure of their eyes on him. And instead of stepping back, he became more defensive. His voice grew sharper, his posture taller. The young woman, however, didn't react. She stood quietly, waiting for him to finish whatever he was trying to do. Her quiet patience only made him more frustrated. And in that moment, a small decision, one driven by ego and irritation rather than necessity, set the stage for consequences he could not imagine. He had no idea who she really was, and he had no clue how quickly this ordinary stop would unravel his entire career. The tension in the air was thick. Officer Daniels stood just a few feet from the young woman. The flashing red and blue lights from his patrol car painted the street in harsh colors. Pedestrians on the sidewalk had stopped to watch, their curiosity growing. Some whispered to each other, while others simply stared. Sensing that this was no ordinary traffic stop anymore, the young woman remained calm, her hands relaxed at her sides. She had no reason to fear, but she knew that some people felt a need to test their power when they thought they were in control. She had learned early that patience could change the course of tense moments. And right now, that patience was her greatest strength. Officer Daniels' voice broke the silence. "Step closer. Keep your hands visible," he said. It wasn't the first time he had spoken that way to someone, but usually, the person in front of him looked nervous, scared, or defensive. This time, she did none of those things. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her calm eyes meeting his with quiet curiosity. "Officer, may I ask why you need me to do that?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. There was no mockery, no sarcasm, only a question that challenged him to be reasonable. Daniels hesitated. Part of him knew she was right. The situation did not require this level of intimidation. Yet another part of him, the part that thrived on control, pushed him forward. "Just follow instructions," he replied shortly, trying to mask his growing frustration. She obeyed, taking measured steps closer to him without showing any fear. He noticed that the crowd had grown slightly, people craning their necks to see what would happen next. Daniels could feel their eyes on him, and instead of calming him, it only made him more aggressive. Authority, he thought, must always be shown. "Do you live around here?" he asked suddenly, trying to regain the upper hand. "Yes," she replied. "I live just a few blocks away." He didn't respond immediately. He was watching her closely, trying to spot any sign of dishonesty, any small tell that could justify his behavior. But her face gave nothing away. No panic, no guilt, just calmness. And that calmness, he realized with a sinking feeling, was making him look worse in front of the crowd. "Have you been drinking?" he asked, his tone sharper now. It was a standard question, but the way he said it carried suspicion. "No, officer." "I haven't," she said calmly, and then added, "I don't drink and drive." Daniels felt a flash of irritation. Most people would have stuttered or hesitated, but she spoke with quiet certainty. He took a step closer, unconsciously narrowing the distance between them. She didn't step back. "Open your bag," he ordered, thinking that searching her might give him some control over the situation. "Officer, is that really necessary?" she asked. Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't sound scared. She sounded measured, as if she had already calculated every outcome. Daniels hesitated. The question was fair, and for a split second, he wondered if he was overstepping. But he quickly shook off the doubt. He had authority. He had rules. He had the law behind him, more so he thought. "Do it!" "Now," he said. With deliberate care, she opened her bag. Inside, there was nothing unusual, just a few personal items and some paperwork. She handed it to him without a word. Daniels rifled through it quickly, trying to justify his sense of superiority. Nothing there, though. Everything was ordinary. Frustration began to bubble inside him. This was supposed to be a moment where he asserted control, where the person in front of him realized the power he held. But she was calm, polite, and composed. She wasn't scared. She wasn't apologetic beyond the initial admission. She wasn't intimidated. Daniels decided to push harder. "Do you know what could happen if you disobey instructions during a traffic stop?" he asked, lowering his voice. "You could face serious trouble." "Yes, officer." "I understand," she replied without flinching. The crowd was watching now. Some of them were murmuring under their breath. They could sense the unnecessary tension. The young woman's calmness, even in the face of his aggression, made her appear dignified, almost untouchable. It also made Daniels appear overbearing, someone reacting to a simple traffic violation as if it were a major crime. "I need you to step aside and let me check your car," he said, gesturing toward the back of the vehicle. "Officer, may I ask why?" she said again. There was no argument, no sarcasm, just a question that demanded a reasonable answer. Daniels felt a pang of frustration. Why was she questioning him politely instead of panicking? Why was she making him pause? That pause, though brief, was enough to plant doubt in his mind, a feeling he wasn't used to. "Just move aside," he snapped. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if showing that she had nothing to hide. Her movements were controlled, precise, and calm. The more composed she seemed, the more uncomfortable Daniels felt. Authority, he thought, was about fear, but she didn't show it. She was calm, poised, and unshaken. For a moment, the world around him felt strange. He looked at the crowd again. People were quiet now, but their eyes were sharp. They weren't judging her, they were judging him. And for the first time, he felt the weight of his behavior reflected back at him. He knew he could escalate the situation further, but something told him he should stop. Instead, he chose to continue. "Do you have any identification besides this?" he asked, his voice tight. "Yes, officer," she said. She reached into her bag again and handed him a small card. He looked at it briefly, then frowned. It was nothing unusual to him, just a standard eye to but something about the way she handed it over, calm and respectful, gave him pause. "Where are you going right now?" he asked. "Home, officer." "Just home," she replied. Daniels felt the tension growing inside him, a mix of frustration, confusion, and doubt. His plan to assert dominance was failing. She wasn't reacting the way he expected. She wasn't scared. She wasn't intimidated. She was untouchable, at least, in the moment. And then, in that brief pause, she said something that would change everything. Something that would turn a routine traffic stop into a situation no one could forget. But he didn't realize it yet. He didn't know who she really was, and he didn't know that. The next few minutes would decide his career, his freedom, and his reputation. The air seemed to shift in an instant. Officer Daniels was still standing near the car, going through the motions of authority, but he felt a strange hesitation creeping into his thoughts. The young woman had been calm the entire time, polite, cooperative, almost unreal in her composure. And now she spoke, her voice quiet but firm, carrying a weight that Daniels had not anticipated. "Officer, I should probably mention something, she said, her tone steady. I am the mayor's daughter. The words hit him like a sudden jolt of electricity. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, and even the occasional pedestrian stopped walking, staring at the scene as if sensing a revelation. For a moment, Daniels felt frozen. His confidence, the same confidence that had guided him through countless stops, wavered. What? He stammered, his voice slightly shaky. The mayor's daughter, she repeated calmly. I live here, but I also have responsibilities at City Hall. I understand traffic rules, and I don't intend to break them. But I think you should know who I am. Daniels looked around. The flashing lights of his patrol car seemed suddenly too bright, harsh, and accusatory. The murmurs of the onlookers grew, not loud enough to be disrespectful, but enough to make him aware of every eye watching him. He realized instantly that this was no ordinary stop anymore. He had been confronting someone with connections far beyond what he had imagined. City Hall? The mayor's office? He asked, his voice tight. Yes, she said. Her calmness never wavered. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make any dramatic gestures, and yet every word carried authority. She was poised in a way that silently demanded respect. Daniels felt a strange mix of embarrassment and anger. Embarrassment because he had been acting aggressively towards someone who held a position of influence, and anger because, in his mind, no one, no matter who they were, should make him feel uncertain about his authority. For the first time that evening, he paused. His mind raced through options. Could he continue to push the situation? Could he claim he didn't know? Could he try to regain control before things escalated further? The thoughts collided, but nothing seemed easy or safe. The young woman noticed the change immediately. She tilted her head slightly, observing him as if studying a pattern, reading his next move before he even realized it himself. Her calm eyes never left his, and Daniels felt something unfamiliar. Vulnerability. Not hers, his. I understand this may be surprising. She said softly, almost gently, but I hope we can handle this without unnecessary tension. I have no intention of causing trouble, and I expect the law to be applied fairly, as it should be. Her words were simple, but every sentence was precise, measured, and effective. Daniels felt the weight of the crowd, the flashing lights, and her words pressing down on him. He realized that he had crossed a line mentally, emotionally, and professionally. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out as he intended. I was just enforcing the rules, he said finally, his voice a little weaker than he expected. Yes, officer, she replied. Rules are important, but how we enforce them matters just as much. Her statement was calm, almost conversational, yet it carried an undeniable truth. Daniels had been so focused on asserting authority that he hadn't considered fairness, patience, or judgment. And now, with her standing before him, that oversight felt glaring. The crowd started to murmur quietly, the energy shifting. They could sense the authority had changed hands, not because she was intimidating, but because she commanded respect without force. Daniels tried to regain composure. He straightened his uniform, adjusted his belt, and reminded himself that he was still the officer. But the realization that he might have gone too far lingered in his mind. He took a step back, trying to distance himself physically from the moment, though not emotionally. Do you expect special treatment because of who you are? He asked, his voice tighter than before. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I expect to be treated fairly, like anyone else. My position should not grant me immunity, and it does not. Her words made Daniels pause again. He hadn't anticipated such clarity. He had expected either fear, defensiveness, or excuses, but not honesty, not dignity, not the kind of calm confidence that made him rethink his every action. Then why reveal it? He asked, trying to mask his nervousness with authority. Because it's relevant, she said simply. You were acting aggressively, and I want this encounter to be transparent. I want accountability. The words landed like a hammer. Daniel's stomach tightened. He realized that the casual stop had transformed into something serious. He had made mistakes in judgment. He had overstepped, And now there were witnesses. The young woman's composure never faltered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply stood, letting the truth speak for itself. The crowd seemed to sense it too. People shifted slightly, looking from Daniels to her, noting the contrast in how each handled the situation. Daniels tried to speak again, to regain some control, but every word felt hollow. I need to take your information back to the station, he said finally, his voice low. Yes, officer, she replied, and I am happy to cooperate. But I will not accept unnecessary threats or intimidation. Daniels nodded slowly, a part of him realizing that he was already in too deep to recover with just words. He motioned for her to return to the car to finalize the paperwork. She complied, moving deliberately, her posture straight, confident, and unshaken. As she sat back in the driver's seat, Daniels felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief because she was cooperating. Dread because he knew the implications of this encounter could be serious. He had acted in a way that might be considered misconduct. And now, the fact that she was the mayor's daughter made the situation far more delicate than he had imagined. He returned to his patrol car to write notes, trying to control the narrative in his mind. But every glance at her reminded him of the calm confidence she carried, the kind of quiet power that made people listen. Even without authority on paper, the more he looked, the more he realized how quickly a situation could shift when ego, authority, and patience collided. Outside, the crowd began to disperse slowly. Some people shook their heads, others whispered, but all had noticed the shift. She had stood her ground without aggression, without fear, and without disrespect. Daniels had confronted what he thought was ordinary defiance, only to find himself facing something entirely unexpected. And in that moment, he understood in a deep and unsettling way that the encounter was no longer about a minor traffic stop. It was about authority, accountability, and the consequences of underestimating someone who knew how to handle herself under pressure. He didn't yet know how far the consequences would reach. He only knew that the night had changed everything, and the next steps would be far more serious than he could have anticipated the moment the young woman drove away. The city street seemed quieter, almost as if it were catching its breath after the tense encounter. Officer Daniels sat in his patrol car, staring at his notes, feeling a tight knot of unease in his chest. He replayed every detail in his mind, every word, every gesture, every step. He knew this wasn't going to be a routine story he could file and forget. The fact that she was the mayor's daughter made the situation far more serious than he had anticipated. By the time he returned to the station, whispers had already begun. Word traveled fast in the department, and officers who had not been on duty knew something had happened. Daniels walked through the hallways, trying to keep his head high, but he could feel the weight of glances from his colleagues. Some were curious, some amused, and a few wore expressions of caution, as if they knew this story would not end quietly. Within hours, his superior called him into the office. Daniels entered, trying to appear calm, though his stomach churned with anxiety. The commanding officer looked at him with a mix of concern and seriousness. Daniels. I've heard about this stop tonight, the officer began. We need to get your report immediately. There's a complaint being prepared. Daniel swallowed hard. He knew what this meant. A complaint against an officer for misconduct could change everything. Yes, sir, he said, keeping his voice steady. I'll write it right away. As he sat down to prepare his report, he realized that words he would normally use, phrases that had always helped him defend his actions, felt inadequate. The encounter had been simple at first, a minor traffic violation, but it had escalated quickly. And now, it would be scrutinized under a microscope. Every movement, every tone, every decision would be examined. By the next morning, the investigation was already underway. The mayor's office had been informed of the incident. Internal affairs officers arrived to interview Daniels and review the body camera footage. The young woman's statement was detailed and precise. She had described the events calmly, noting how the officer had acted aggressively and unnecessarily, while she had remained cooperative and polite. Watching the footage, Daniels felt a sinking feeling in his chest. Every movement he had made, Every tone he had used was visible and clear. The video showed him stepping too close, speaking sharply, and ordering searches without reasonable cause. There was no question that his behavior had crossed professional boundaries. Witness statements came in from pedestrians who had observed the encounter. They described a tense interaction, noting the young woman's calm demeanor and the officer's aggressive approach. One statement in particular caught Daniels off guard. A local shop owner had said, "She handled herself with patience and respect. He seemed out of control, like he was trying too hard to prove something." As the evidence piled up, Daniels realized that the situation was far worse than a simple complaint. The investigation revealed a pattern of similar complaints in his past. Minor incidents, unreported disputes, and aggressive behavior toward citizens all had contributed to an image that now worked against him. In the days that followed, Daniels found himself called into meeting after meeting. His commanding officer, internal affairs, and legal advisors all emphasized the seriousness of the incident. The words abuse of authority and misconduct were repeated often, and each time they were spoken, a heavier weight settled in his chest. Meanwhile, the young woman continued her work, handling her responsibilities at City Hall with grace. Despite the incident, she remained professional, calm, and composed. She did not seek to escalate the situation further, but her statement and demeanor carried undeniable weight. Everyone who had observed her noticed her poise, and it contrasted sharply with Daniels' aggressive behavior at the department. Tensions were high. Officers discussed the case quietly in the break room, some defending Daniels, others noting that he had gone too far. The mayor's office issued a statement emphasizing the importance of accountability, noting that no one, regardless of status, should be treated unfairly by law enforcement. The statement was polite but firm, signaling that the city would not tolerate abuse of authority. Daniels spent long hours reflecting on what had happened. For the first time in his career, he questioned his decisions and his approach to authority. He realized that his desire to assert power had blinded him to fairness and respect. The encounter had started as routine, but escalated because of his own choices. And now those choices threatened his career. Internal Affairs conducted a thorough review. They interviewed Daniels multiple times, cross-checked the footage, and compared witness statements. Each session was uncomfortable, and Daniels found it increasingly difficult to justify his actions. He tried to explain that he had been following protocol, but the evidence made it clear that he had exceeded his authority by the end of the week. The department concluded that disciplinary action was necessary. Daniels faced suspension while the legal process continued. There were discussions of charges, potential hearings, and even the possibility of criminal consequences. The realization hit him hard. This was no longer about ego or authority. It was about accountability and the law. Even outside the department, the story attracted attention. Local news outlets picked up on the incident, highlighting the unusual situation of an officer confronting the mayor's daughter. The coverage was factual, but emphasized the importance of proper conduct by law enforcement. Daniels knew that, by now, his actions had become public knowledge. There was no way to reverse it. Through it all, the young woman's calm presence remained a constant reminder of what had gone wrong. She had handled herself with dignity, fairness, and respect, even when confronted with unnecessary aggression. Daniels could not help but acknowledge that her behavior had been exemplary. He had underestimated her completely, and that misjudgment had cost him more than he could have imagined. As the investigation continued, Daniels faced the reality of consequences. His reputation was damaged, his authority questioned, and his future uncertain. He spent sleepless nights thinking about how quickly things had spiraled. A minor traffic stop, which should have been routine, had turned into a career-altering incident. The city, meanwhile, took steps to ensure accountability within the department. Training programs were emphasized, oversight procedures were reinforced, and officers were reminded that authority came with responsibility. Daniels' case became an example, not just for him, but for everyone in law enforcement, of what could happen when personal ego overshadowed fairness and judgment. In the quiet moments, Daniels began to understand the deeper lessons. Authority was not about intimidation. Respect was not earned through force. Accountability was not optional. And most importantly, Underestimating someone, especially someone calm, confident, and aware, could have consequences far beyond a single encounter. The young woman returned to her life. Continuing her duties at City Hall, she did not seek revenge or escalate the situation beyond what was necessary. Her actions had been guided by patience, respect, and principle. And through it all, she had shown that composure and integrity could change the course of events in ways that aggression and ego never could. Daniels, on the other hand, faced the difficult path ahead. Internal affairs continued their review, legal proceedings loomed, and the reality of his choices settled heavily on his shoulders. The confrontation had started as a simple routine stop, but it had revealed the consequences of underestimating someone and overstepping boundaries of authority. And in that city, among the streets, the people, and the quiet hum of life continuing around them, the story became a lesson one about patience, fairness, and the power of standing firm without fear. It was a lesson Daniels would never forget, no matter where his future took him. Weeks passed since the traffic stop, and the city seemed to move on as usual. Life carried on in offices, homes, and streets, but for Officer Daniels, nothing felt normal. Each morning, he woke up with the weight of the past incident pressing on him. He thought about every word, every action, and every decision that had led to this moment. The consequences he had once thought were distant now felt very real. The investigation had concluded, and the report was clear. Daniel's behavior had crossed professional boundaries. His use of unnecessary aggression, intimidation, and overreach had been documented, witnessed, and recorded. The decision was final. He would face legal action, disciplinary consequences, and possible jail time. The department announced his suspension pending the outcome of further proceedings. Daniels felt a mixture of fear, shame, and disbelief. How quickly everything had changed. Meanwhile, the young woman continued her life quietly, but with remarkable grace. She handled her responsibilities at City Hall with diligence, ensuring that her work did not suffer because of the incident. She did not gloat, she did not provoke, and she did not use her influence beyond what was necessary to ensure justice was served. Her calm presence remained a quiet lesson for everyone around her. Daniels spent days preparing his defense. But deep down, he knew the truth. His actions had been excessive. No explanation, no excuse could fully erase what had happened. He had let ego, pride, and a desire to assert authority overshadow fairness, patience, and judgment. He realized that authority was a responsibility, not a privilege, and that mistakes in judgment could have serious consequences. The media had picked up the story in the meantime, though it was reported factually and respectfully. Coverage focused on the unusual nature of the encounter and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. Daniels tried to avoid the attention, but every headline reminded him that the city had witnessed the event and that the consequences were unavoidable. One morning, Daniels was summoned to a hearing. The room was quiet but tense, with city officials, legal representatives, and internal affairs officers present. He sat in the chair, feeling small under the scrutiny of the room. Papers were spread before him, and the evidence, the body camera footage, its witness statements, and the detailed report lay open for all to see. The proceedings were formal but fair. Every aspect of the encounter was discussed. Officers who had reviewed the case explained the patterns of behavior that had led to the disciplinary action. Witnesses described what they saw. And every time the young woman's name came up, Daniels felt a mixture of admiration and regret. She had handled herself with respect, patience, and composure, and he had underestimated her completely. When it came time for his statement, Daniel spoke slowly, carefully, and honestly. He admitted that his behavior had been excessive. He acknowledged that he had allowed ego and pride to guide his decisions, rather than fairness and judgment. He expressed regret for the unnecessary tension and stress he had caused. For the first time in a long while, he spoke without trying to justify his actions, without claiming authority, without hiding behind the uniform. He simply admitted his mistake. The outcome of the hearing was firm. Daniels would face a period of suspension, retraining, and community service. Legal consequences were also part of the process. though they were mitigated by his cooperation and acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The decision sent a message. Authority came with responsibility, and abuse of power would not be tolerated. Daniels realized that, though harsh, the consequences were fair. Outside the courtroom, the young woman remained composed as ever. She had not sought revenge, nor had she made the situation personal. She had acted in the interest of justice, fairness, and principle. Her approach had shown the city and Daniels that strength was not about intimidation, it was about calm, composed action, and respect for the law. Daniels walked through the streets afterward, feeling the weight of what had happened. People recognized him, some quietly nodding, others avoiding eye contact. He understood now that his reputation had been damaged, but more importantly, that he had learned a lesson that would shape the rest of his life. Mistakes could not be erased, but they could be acknowledged, and accountability could lead to growth. At the station, the atmosphere had changed. Officers were more aware, more cautious, and more respectful in their interactions. The city had reinforced oversight and training programs, ensuring that authority would be exercised responsibly. Daniels observed these changes. Realizing that the incident had consequences far beyond himself, it had influenced the department, the community, and the way law enforcement was perceived, reflecting on the events. Daniels understood the deeper meaning of respect and patience. The young woman had not been confrontational, loud, or threatening. She had simply stood her ground, maintained composure, and expected fairness. Her calm strength had highlighted his errors and taught him a lesson that no amount of training or experience could have provided. The city itself seemed to recognize the balance between authority and accountability. Citizens felt heard, and the police department took steps to rebuild trust. Daniel's story became an example within the department of what could happen when personal ego interfered with professional duty. It was a reminder to all officers that every encounter mattered, and that fairness, patience, and respect could prevent small incidents from escalating into life-changing consequences. Over time, Daniels began to rebuild his life, taking responsibility for his actions. He completed his retraining, engaged in community service, and reflected deeply on his approach to authority. Though the experience had been difficult and humbling, it became a turning point in his career. He understood now that power must always be balanced with respect, that mistakes could be costly, and that humility was essential in the role of law enforcement. The young woman continued her work in the community, admired for her poise and integrity. People who knew the story spoke of her as an example of strength without aggression, patience without compromise, and courage without confrontation. She had shown that standing firm and fair could achieve more than force or intimidation ever could, in the quiet moments. Daniels often thought about that evening: the silver car, the calm driver, the flashing lights, and the crowd that had silently witnessed the moment. He remembered the way she had held herself, the way she had spoken, and the way she had reminded him, without anger or malice, that actions have consequences. It was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The city moved on. The streets filled again with cars and pedestrians, and life continued. But the story lingered as a quiet reminder. Authority is not measured by fear or aggression, but by fairness, respect, and accountability. And underestimating someone, especially someone calm and composed, can have consequences far greater than anyone could predict. For Daniels, the experience had been painful but necessary. It had taught him lessons about humility, responsibility, and the importance of thinking before acting. For the young woman, it had been a test of patience and composure, and she had passed with grace. The encounter, once tense and uncertain, it became a story of accountability, growth, and the enduring power of calm strength. In the end, both lives had been changed. One person had learned the cost of ego and misjudgment, and the other had shown the city the quiet power of integrity. And for everyone who witnessed or heard the story, the lesson was clear: respect, fairness, and patience are the true measures of strength, and actions, no matter how small, carry consequences that can shape the course of life.